Hey guys, welcome back. So we're continuing into the functions unit, and today's lesson is about domain and range. So let's go ahead and write down today's objective. Today's objective is I can identify the domain and range of a function. Now, over here you can see I'm going to have you put the definition of the domain and range. Now I'm going to go ahead and tell you what the domain is, and then you're going to select which of the following are going to be parts of the range, okay? So if the domain is the independent variable, the input, and also the x-coordinate, you have to tell me what the range is because the range is the absolute opposite of the domain. So go ahead and answer that right now. Alright, so very good. Now over here, the independent variable, the opposite of that would be the dependent variable. Over here we have the input, the opposite of that would be the output, and the opposite of the x-coordinate would be the y-coordinate. Okay? Now, down here you can see a set of ordered pairs. Now, for the first one right here, the domain would represent every x value. Now, we have ordered pairs in here, and we know that in an ordered pair, the x value is the first number in the ordered pair. So the first domain would be this -3, because that's the first x value. The second one would be -1, then we'd have 0, then we'd have 2, and then we'd have 4. Because again, those are all of the x values. Those are my domain. Now, the range, again, is the y-coordinate. So that would be the second number of each ordered pair. So the second number of this ordered pair is -7. This one would be -3. This one would be -1, 3, and 7. So we have 5 that are part of the domain and 5 that are part of the range. Now, that's not always going to happen because looking at number 2, the first two numbers for the domain are the same number, okay? So the domain repeats over here and over here. What you're going to do when you write this down, you're only going to write the -3 one time, all right? This also happens with the 0, so you see that we have a 0 and a 0, so we're only going to write that 0 one time for the domain. And then the last part is the 4, so we're going to put the 4 right there, okay? Now, even though we have 5 ordered pairs, we only have 3 of those ordered pairs that are in the domain. Now the range is very similar to that because we're going to start off by looking for the smallest range. Alright, and the smallest range would be the -3 over here. Alright, so that would be the first one I put down. Then I have -1. Then I have +3. And then I have 7. Right? Then you can notice that I still have another 7, but again, we're not going to write that twice, we're just going to write it once. So there's my 7. Okay? Now, press pause if you need to, otherwise I'm going to the next slide. Now, in number 3 and 4, you're going to do the same thing by identifying the domain and range. Alright, the other thing that I'm asking you to do in this one is to tell me if it's a function or not and explain your reasoning. So for the first one, we'll do this one together, number 3. So the domain, again, is the x values. The x values is -4, -2, 0, and 1. Okay, 4 ordered pairs and 4 x values. Now the range, again, are the y values. So that's going to be the -3, the -2, the -1, and the -1/2. Okay. Now the question is this a function or not? If you look at the domain and you see that none of the x's repeat, therefore it is a function. Now it does not matter if the y's repeat. The only thing that matters is if the x's repeat to identify if it's a function or not. So it is a function, and the reason is because none of the domains repeat, which are the x values. Okay? So go ahead and do number 4 on your own right now for me. Alright, so the domain for this one is 0, 1, 4, and 1 again. So we're not going to rewrite that because it's already there. So that's going to be done there. Now the range, we'll look for the smallest range just so that we can keep it in order. The smallest range is the -1 over here, so I'll write that one first. Then we have 0, then we have 1, and then we have 2. Alright, so that's 4 that are part of the range. Now, hopefully you got this part correct because it asks you, is it a function or not? And we're going to say that it is not a function because of the fact that the domain repeats. And where does the domain repeat? It repeats right here and right here because the x values are 1. Okay? All right. So now number 5 is a relation, and for number 5, what we need to do is we need to come up with the domain and range of the relation. Now you always need to remember that the first circle is the x values, and then the second circle are the y values. So for the first circle, we have in order the domain is 0, 1, and 3. Now the range over here, all right, in order is going to be -2, -1, and 0. All right. Now, the question comes up that is going to come up that is it a function or not? And in this case, we do not have a function. All right. And remember, we don't have a function if the x repeats, which is the domain, and it does repeat right over here because you can see 2 arrows coming out of 0, so that would make 2 relations of 0, -1, and 0, 0, so therefore it is not a function. All right, let's go to the next slide. Now for number 6 and 7, you're going to do the same thing as number 5. You're going to identify the domain and range, and you're going to tell me if it's a function or not. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time to do that right now, and then we'll go over it. Alright, now for number 6, again, the first circle is the input, so the first circle is the domain. So the domain for this one would be 1, 4, and 7. Now the range only has one number in there, so the range is just the number 6. Now the question is this a function or not? The answer is that it is, because none of the x's repeat. Now, none of the domains repeat because if you look at all these numbers, only one arrow is coming out of each of them. Because this is the point 1, 6, 4, 6, 7, 6. None of the x's repeat. All right, now for number 7, you can see that we have the domain over here. Now to write it in order, you'd have to write the -2 first. So the domain would be -2, 0, 8, and 15. The range, let's start with the -6 first, would be -6, 2, and -7. All right, now is this a function or is it not a function? The answer is that it is not a function because the x repeats, or the domain repeats, and the domain repeats right over here where you have a -2 pointing at the 2, and it's also pointing at the 7, because that would be the ordered pair -2, 2, -2, 7, and you see in those ordered pairs the x's repeat. All right, if you need to press pause, go for it, otherwise I'm going to the next slide. Alright, now for this one right here, we have XY charts. And these XY charts, again, the X values are the domain, the Y values are the range. So for this first one, number 8, the domain is going to be -1, 0, 1, and 2. And I can see that in order, -1, 0, 1, and 2. Okay? And then the range would be, now let's write these in order. We would start with -1, then the 3, then the 5, and then the 7. So this right here is the domain and range. All right, and then you can see that we have -1, 0, 1, 2. None of these numbers repeat because, again, these are all ordered pairs anyway. So this is a function because the domain does not repeat. Go ahead and do number 9 for me, please. All right, good. So now for number 9, we have 1, 2, 3, and 2. All right, so the domain would be 1, 2, 3, and 2, but we already wrote 2. So that's going to be it right there. Okay, now the range is going to be in order 8, 11, 14, and then 17. Now, is this a function? Well, I know that it's not a function because of the fact that the domain repeats. Where does it repeat exactly? Right here and right here you have 2 x values in the x coordinate. Okay? Alright guys, here's number 10 and 11. Go ahead and do these on your own and then we'll go over it. Alright, just like the other one, over here the domain is the first circle, which is the input, and the domain would be 1, 2, and 9. The range is the output over here, which is that second circle, which is going to be 4 and 22. Alright? Now what we're going to do is identify if it's a domain and range, and identify if it's a function or not a function. And in this case, it is not a function due to the fact that the domain repeats right over here, because again, this makes 2 ordered pairs, 2, 4, and 2, 22, and in those two ordered pairs the x repeats. Alright, now for the next one, we have a domain that's in the first circle of negative 6, 0, 6, and 12. Alright, and then the range is 0, 7, and 17. And for this one, we can see that we have a function, because in this one, none of the arrows are pointing out of the inputs twice, so we know that the domain does not repeat. Okay? Alright, press pause if you need to, otherwise I'm going to the next slide. Alright, go ahead and do number 12 and 13 on your own. Identify the domain and range and tell me if it is a function or not. Go ahead and do that right now. Alright, now for number 12, the domains, we have the smallest one is negative 6, then we have negative 3, then we have 0, then we have negative 6 again, but again, we do not write that one twice because of the fact that we already have it in the domain set. The range, again, we have to put these in order. The smallest one is the positive 3, then the 7, then the 8, and then the 10. Alright? Now in this one, we're going to say that it's not a function because the x does repeat, the domain does repeat right here and right here with the two negative 6's. Now for number 13, the domain in order, we're going to start with negative 2, then we go up to the 0, then the 2, and then the 4. The range, we only have 2 this time. We have 8 and we have 14. Alright, now the question is this a function or is it not a function? This is still a function because, again, it doesn't matter if the y repeats. We just want to make sure the domain doesn't repeat, and you can see the domain does not repeat over here. Alright guys, that's it. So I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.